Chapter 1. The Epiphany of Exhaustion. The sky above the Ethelgard Academy dueling grounds was a cruel, cheery blue. A perfect day for a beating. Alistair Finch lay on his back on the cold, magically reinforced stone, the breath knocked from his lungs in a pained whoosh. The smell of ozone and his own singed tunic filled his nose. His muscles screamed a familiar chorus of complaint. In his ears, the roar of the student crowd was a distant, mocking wave. And another decisive victory for Leo Stormwrath, boomed the amplified voice of Professor Brandt. Notice the clean follow-through on the elemental lance, class. Stormwrath, well done. Alistair turned his head, just enough to see the victor. Leo stood at the center of the arena, chest heaving, a lock of golden hair artfully fallen across his forehead. He raised a hand, not in triumph, but in a modest, practiced wave, eliciting another round of screams, particularly from the cohort of first-year evokers. His smile was bright, public, and entirely empty of any memory of the person he'd just blasted 20 feet across the platform. Up you get, Finch. Professor Brandt's voice was closer now, his shadow falling over Alistair. A hand, calloused and strong, gripped Alistair's arm and hauled him upright with an efficiency that bordered on violence. Alistair's knees wobbled. You're developing a troubling habit of late-stage defensive collapse. Work on your shield endurance. Stormwrath here needs a moving target, not a stationary one. As Brandt clapped a heavy hand on Leo's shoulder, steering him toward the adoring crowd for a post-match analysis, Alistair heard the professor's low, congratulatory murmur. Another fine victory. That Finch boy is a reliable motivator, isn't he? Always shows up, always puts in just enough to make you work for it. A good, dependable piece of equipment. The words, reliable piece of equipment, did not land like an insult. They landed like a verdict. They cut through the residual pain and magical fatigue with the clarity of a scalpel. Alistair limped off the dueling platform, the noise fading behind him. He was not a person. He was a narrative device, a reliably placed stone on the path of the Chosen One, there to be kicked, to make the hero's journey seem more arduous, to make his shine brighter by contrast. He was a supporting character in his own life, and his sole supporting role was to be supported by Leo's fists, feet, and spells. Back in the barren solitude of his minor noble's dormitory chamber, Alistair did not tend to his bruises. He sat at his plain wooden desk and pulled out his academy schedule. He looked at the week ahead, printed in neat, bureaucratic ink. Monday, advanced defensive praxis with Stormwrath. Mandatory sparring session. Tuesday, elemental counter applications. Paired drills, partner, Stormwrath L. Wednesday, practical dueling assessment. Bracket position, adjacent to Stormwrath. Thursday, field exercise. Mana Beast confrontation. Team assignment, designated bait/support for Stormwrath contingent. Friday, arena showcase. Exhibition match versus Stormwrath. It was a schedule of meticulously planned, preordained humiliation. A full-time job of being a stepping stone. And he was exhausted. It wasn't just the physical toll. It was the psychic weight of the script, the sheer, grinding effort of showing up to be the foil. The early mornings to ensure he was adequately prepared to lose. The late nights nursing injuries, so he'd be functional enough to lose again tomorrow. The mental gymnastics of pretending a spark of rivalry when all he felt was a profound, soul-deep weariness. He realized, dreadfully overworked. A memory surfaced. His first day at Ethelgard, lost and overwhelmed, he'd stumbled into the great archives seeking quiet. He'd spent an hour there, surrounded by the smell of parchment and peace, before a proctor had found him and dragged him to orientation. That hour had been the most content of his entire academy life. An idea, fragile and desperate, bloomed in his mind. The next morning, while the rest of the combat magic track was doing dawn calisthenics, Alistair Finch walked to the administrative athenaeum, a gray, windowless block of a building. Inside, the air was still and smelled of dust and ink. A wizened clerk peered at him from behind a wall of ledgers. "I wish to change my major." Alistair said, his voice steady. The clerk blinked. Change? From combat magic? To what? Magical history and library management. The clerk stared as if Alistair had requested a transfer to the School of Underwater Basket Weaving. He fumbled for a massive, leather-bound tome of regulations. There's the procedure. Bylaw 47C, subsection 12. Transference of academic track requires head of department approval from both origin and destination. A review of prerequisite credits, a formal petition. Alistair had spent the night reading. He placed a sheet of parchment on the counter. I have prepared the petition. My minor noble stipend, under Academy Charter 3, covers any track within the Arcane Arts faculty, which includes historical studies. My first-year general credits fulfill the prerequisites for the history track's second-year entry, as per the course catalog from 127A. I have the relevant pages tabbed. I require only the signatures. The clerk, bewildered by the onslaught of precedent, took the parchment. The machinery of bureaucracy, slow and seldom used for such purposes, began to grind. It took 3 hours. 3 hours of fetching different supervisors, of verifying stamps, of debating obscure clauses. Alistair waited, a monument of quiet patience. Finally, a heavy, official seal was stamped onto the transfer form. The deed was done. He felt the weight lift. The script was in his hands now. He had written himself a new part, non-combatant. He was in his dorm, carefully packing away his dueling robes and focus crystals, when the door burst open without a knock. Professor Brandt filled the doorway, his face a thundercloud. Finch, what is this idiocy? You missed morning drills. You have a paired session in 10 minutes. Stormwrath is waiting. Alistair turned. He felt a strange calm. He picked up the freshly stamped parchment from his desk and held it out. Brandt snatched it, his eyes scanning the text. Confusion, then dawning, furious understanding crossed his features. This is a joke. You cannot be serious. You are throwing away a promising. My contract with Conflict, Professor, Alistair interrupted, his voice soft but clear as crystal, has been terminated. He shouldered a bag containing his few personal books and a tin of tea leaves. He walked past the sputtering professor, out the door, and down the corridor toward the one place in Ethelgard that promised neither glory nor pain, but simply quiet. The gears of his old life ground to a halt behind him. Ahead, the silent stacks of Y. Ted. Chapter 2. Sanctuary of Silent Stacks. The great archives of Ethelgard were not a single room, but a geographical feature. A cavernous, multi-leveled labyrinth of knowledge carved into the living rock of the mountain upon which the Academy perched. The air here was several degrees cooler, carrying the immutable scent of aged paper, polished oak, and the faint, dry tang of preservation spells. The silence was not an absence, but a presence, a thick, velvety blanket that absorbed sound and haste alike. Alistair stood just inside the enormous arched entrance, his travel bag at his feet, and inhaled. For the first time in a year, his shoulders unhunched from around his ears. Lost, combatant. The voice was dry, papery, and came from a high desk to his right. Seated behind, it was a woman who seemed woven from the same material as the archives. Her hair was a steely gray, pulled into a severe but practical knot. Her face was a network of fine lines, and her eyes, the color of forgotten slate, regarded him with an intelligence that felt less like observation and more like gentle, total excavation. Not lost, archivist, Alistair said, approaching and presenting his transfer papers. Transferred. As of today, the woman, head archivist Ilara Morn, according to the brass nameplate, took the parchment. She read it slowly, her expression inscrutable. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her mouth. It was not a warm smile, but one of recognition. Finch, Alistair Finch, you were the one in the preliminary duels last term. Took a rather spectacular lightning arc from the Stormwrath boy. Got up again. She looked from the paper to his face. And now you're here. Seeking shelter in the footnotes, are we? I'm seeking a job that doesn't involve daily concussions, Alistair replied honestly. a flicker of approval in her slate-gray eyes. A noble pursuit, more noble than most pursued in the arenas above. She pushed the paper back. Very well. Your first duty, Apprentice Finch, is to understand that this is not a repository of dead things. It is a sanctuary for living, restless knowledge. You will treat it with reverence, but not fear. You will learn its moods and its geography. You will be quiet, you will be precise, and you will never, ever use an open flame spell near the manuscript wing. Understood. Yes, head archivist. Good. Follow me. His training began not with grand historical theories, but with profound physicality. She taught him how to walk, a soft, gliding step that disturbed neither dust nor silence. She taught him the handspeak of the archives, a flick of fingers to indicate direction, a flattened palm to demand stillness, a gentle tapping of wrist to ask for a tool. She showed him the conservation alcove, where damaged texts were nursed with brushes made of dragonfly wing, solvents distilled from moonlight-touched dew, and spells of reweaving so subtle they felt like a sigh. His first real task was in that alcove. A mid-grade water infiltration had afflicted a 14th-century treatise on aqueous mana conduits. The pages were stuck together. The ink bled into tragic Rorschach blots. Archivist Morn demonstrated the first step, patience. "Rush it," she whispered, her hand steady as she carefully inserted a thin-boned spatula between two pages, and the knowledge is lost forever. Your enemy is time, but your weapon is also time. And this. She handed him a pot of a clear, viscous gel. Apply with the sable brush, 1 millimeter at a time. Alistair sat. He breathed. He dipped the brush. The world shrank to the parchment under his hands, to the slow, meticulous work of salvage. The gnawing anxiety of the dueling schedule, the phantom aches of old bruises, the constant, low-grade fear of being called upon. All of it dissolved in the face of this simple, tangible problem. He was fixing something, not breaking it for someone else's glory. Fixing it. Days folded into a new, serene rhythm. He arrived at dawn, brewed a pot of mint tea in the small archivist's nook. He brought his own leaves. The academy stuff was swill, and received his duties. He reshelved returned codices, their leather covers whispering secrets as he slid them home. He updated the master ledger with new acquisitions, his handwriting evolving into a neat, meticulous script. He learned the library's classification system, a logic of its own that felt more honest than the arbitrary rankings of the combat track. It was during one of these serene afternoons, while he was carefully applying restorative gel to a particularly stubborn stain, that the sanctuary was breached. The footsteps were all wrong, heavy, confident, ringing on the stone in a rhythm that spoke of open spaces and attention. Alistair didn't need to look up. He knew that tread. Leo Stormwrath stopped at the entrance to the alcove. He was still in his training leathers, a faint aura of spent mana and physical exertion clinging to him. He looked out of place among the muted browns and grays, a splash of vibrant, discordant color. Finch. Alistair finished his brushstroke before setting the tool down. He looked up, his expression politely neutral. Stormwrath, can I help you find something? Leo blinked, thrown. This wasn't the script. There was no sullen glare, no tightened fists, no defensive hunch. Just calm, expectant inquiry. I've been looking for you, Leo said, his voice louder than the room was built for. It echoed off the shelves. You've been skipping sessions. Professor Brandt is furious. My schedule changed, Alistair said mildly. I've transferred tracks. Transferred? Leo's handsome face contorted in disbelief. To this? Dusting books. Magical history and library management. Alistair corrected softly. And currently, aqueous manuscript conservation. It's quite precise work. Leo stared at him, then at the painstakingly laid-out tools, the damaged book, the pot of gel. He seemed to be searching for a hook, a point of attack. You're just running away. You're afraid to face me again after the last beating. Alistair considered this. Was he afraid? He supposed he was afraid of ruining the manuscript. He was afraid of spilling the gel. He was not afraid of Leo Stormwrath. The realization was liberating. I'm afraid this 14th century discourse will be lost if I don't concentrate, Alistair said. Was there something you needed? A reference? Frustration flashed in Leo's blue eyes. This wasn't how it went. The rival was supposed to rise to the bait, to snarl, to make a scene. This placid indifference was a void he didn't know how to fill. I challenge you, Leo declared, the words formal and hollow in the quiet. A rematch. Tomorrow. Dawn. The East practice yard. Alistair looked at him for a long moment. He then reached for a small, clean strip of vellum on his desk. From a drawer, he retrieved a thin rectangle of tooled leather he'd been working on in his scant free moments. A simple bookmark, dyed a deep blue and embossed with a faint geometric pattern. He placed the bookmark on the vellum and slid it across the desk towards Leo. I'm afraid I'm unavailable. The conservation of this treatise takes precedence, Alistair said. His tone wasn't dismissive, but matter-of-fact, as if explaining a fundamental law of the universe. For your own studies. He held Leo's gaze for a second longer, then picked up his brush again, his attention flowing back to the damaged page as seamlessly as water. Leo stood rooted. He looked at the bookmark. It was beautifully made. He looked at Alistair, whose entire world had already narrowed back to the precise application of gel to parchment. The hero, the chosen one, the center of the Academy's universe, had been definitively, politely, and utterly dismissed. He picked up the bookmark. The leather was soft. He had no words. He turned and walked out of the archives, his triumphant entrance reduced to a confused retreat, the strange gift clutched in his hand. The velvet silence closed behind him, undisturbed. In the alcove, Alistair let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. He took a sip of his now-cold tea. It tasted like peace. Chapter 3. The Hero's Confusion. The victory in the end-of-term grand melee was, by any objective measure, spectacular. Leo Stormwrath stood atop the central plinth in the grand arena. The early afternoon sun glinting off the champion's circlet of woven lightning placed upon his brow. Below him, the tiered stone seats erupted in a deafening, adoring roar. Confetti enchanted to sparkle like stardust rained from the sky. Professor Brandt's amplified praises washed over him, detailing the brilliant feint against the Lithgow twins, the flawless mana-chaining of his earth-to-lightning transition, the decisive, fight-ending typhoon rush that had cleared the platform. He raised his hand, the victor's wave. His muscles sang with pleasant fatigue, his mana reserves thrumming from the expenditure and the adulation. He searched the faces in the crowd, for his loyal friends, for the approving nod of the headmaster, for the flushed, admiring gaze of Lady Evangeline from the celestial stream. And, out of habit honed over a year, his eyes flicked to the loser's gate. The dark archway where the defeated finalists would be slinking off, nursing their pride and their wounds. Where a particular face, pale and set with grudging respect or sullen resentment, should have been. The archway was empty. Not just of Alistair Finch. It was empty of anyone. The other combatants had already been shepherded away by healers. The space where his designated rival, his narrative counterweight, was supposed to be was just a shadow. The roar of the crowd suddenly felt thin. The weight of the circlet on his head became a physical pressure. The victory, so complete, so technically perfect, curdled in his stomach, leaving a hollow, metallic taste. He had won the Academy's highest combat honor, and the one person whose defeat was supposed to mean something wasn't even there to witness it. He should be here, Leo thought, the smile on his face feeling like a plaster mask. He should be seeing this. He should be knowing that all those practice defeats led to this. But Finch wasn't in the practice yards anymore. He was in the library, dusting books, and he'd given Leo a bookmark. The post-tournament feast in the Great Hall was a raucous affair. Leo sat at the high table, a plate of succulent roast dragon hen untouched before him. His friends clapped him on the back, retelling his moves with escalating hyperbole. Evangeline, resplendent in silver-threaded robes, offered a cool, competitive smile and a promise of a real match soon. Leo's mind was elsewhere. It was in the silent, cool alcove of the archives. It was fixated on the image of Alastair Finch, back straight, hand steady, utterly absorbed in saving a ruined book. He had looked peaceful. More than that, he had looked beautiful in a way that gilded, cheering people around Leo now were not. It was a severe, intellectual beauty, all sharp angles and focused calm. And he had been so profoundly, insultingly bored by Leo's presence. "Penny for your thoughts, champion?" Evangeline asked, her voice cutting through his reverie. "Finch," Leo said, the name out before he could stop it. Evangeline's perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched. "Finch, that minor noble you used to sweat down every week? What about him?" "He wasn't there. At the melee. Why would he be?" "He quit. Ran off to play librarian." She took a delicate sip of wine. "Weak. I always thought so. Lacked the fire for true combat." "Weak." The word didn't fit. The boy who took a lightning arc to the chest and got up wasn't weak. The boy who looked a chosen one in the eye and offered him a bookmark instead of a challenge wasn't weak. He was something else. Something profoundly confusing. The obsession took root that night. It wasn't about rivalry anymore. It was about solving a puzzle. How could someone possess that kind of latent toughness? Leo had felt it in their clashes, a stubborn, unyielding core, and just abandoned the field. How could they find staring at moldy paper more compelling than the roar of a crowd? The thrill of a spell perfectly cast. He had to provoke a reaction, a real one. The next day, he intercepted Alastair in the main quadrangle, a place teeming with students. "Finch," he called, his voice carrying. "Heard you've traded your focus crystal for a feather duster. Does your family know you've disgraced the Finch name by becoming a glorified maid?" Alastair, who was carrying a stack of repaired folios, paused. He looked at Leo, his gaze calm and assessing, as if Leo were a mildly interesting but ultimately irrelevant specimen. The preservation of knowledge is a duty older and, some would argue, more vital than personal martial glory, Stormwrath. Your family's historical records are likely in need of curation. I could recommend some texts on proper archival technique. He adjusted his grip on the books and walked on. It was infuriating. Leo tried again in the refectory, accidentally bumping Alastair's tray so his soup sloshed. Alastair simply righted the bowl, mopped the spill with a napkin, and said, "Spatial awareness is a skill developed in the close quarters of the stacks as well. You might benefit from some time there." He then proceeded to eat his soup with methodical, undisturbed calm while Leo fumed. Finally, Leo marched into the archives, his purpose a blunt instrument. He would demand satisfaction. He found Alastair not in the alcove, but in a deep reading Corel, a massive tome on pre-imperial manageology, open before him. A steaming cup of tea sat at his elbow. "We need to talk," Leo stated, planting his hands on the desk. Alastair marked his place with a strip of silk and looked up. "You are disrupting a designated quiet zone, Stormwrath. If you have a research inquiry, please submit it to the main desk. This isn't a research inquiry." Leo's voice, despite his effort, rose. "This is about you. About this farce. Look at you. You have real talent. I've felt it. And you're wasting it in this tomb." Alastair's expression didn't change. He seemed to be waiting for Leo to finish, like one might wait for a noisy bird to fly past a window. When Leo fell silent, breathing heavily, Alastair simply said, "My talents are being applied to their fullest potential here. Is there anything else? I have 40 pages on sedimentary mana layers to cross-reference before the noon bell." The dismissal was absolute. It was armor made of pure, unflappable disinterest. Leo felt his anger drain away, replaced by a bewildered exhaustion. He'd been shouting at a wall, and the wall had politely asked him to keep it down. Defeated, he didn't leave. He slid into the corral opposite Alastair's, hidden by a shelf of reference materials. He just watched. Alastair returned to his book. He read with a slow, deep concentration, his eyes tracing lines, his fingers occasionally tracing a diagram on the page. He would sip his tea, make a neat notation on a slate beside him, and turn a page. There was a rhythm to it, a serene, self-contained economy of motion. He was fully, completely there, in a way Leo never was, even in the heat of battle. Leo was always partly aware of the crowd, of his image, of the next move. Alistair was just reading. For a full hour, Leo sat in the shadows and watched a person be peacefully, contentedly bored. And he found it utterly captivating. The focused line of his brow, the graceful turn of his wrist, the absolute lack of performance. It was a beauty devoid of spectacle, and it was somehow more real than anything in the sun-drenched arena. When the noon bell finally tolled, distant and muted through the stone, Alistair closed his book, gathered his notes, and left without a backward glance. Leo sat in the suddenly empty quiet, the ghost of that serene concentration hanging in the air. He stood, his body stiff. He walked out of the archives, through the bustling halls, and straight past the training yard where his squad was waiting. He ignored Evangeline's call. He went to his rooms, lay on his bed, and stared at the canopy. He missed his evening training session. He didn't even send word. Professor Brandt found him the next morning at dawn, still in his day clothes. "Stormwrath, you were absent. Is something wrong? An injury from the melee?" Leo looked at his professor, his mentor, the chief architect of his glorious narrative. "Professor," he asked, his voice raw with genuine confusion, "what does someone do when they don't want to be part of the story?" Brandt stared at him as if he'd spoken in tongues. "Don't be absurd, boy. Everyone is part of the story. You just have to make sure you're the hero of it. Now get to the yard. You have a legacy to uphold." But as Leo mechanically donned his training gear, the question remained, echoing in the new, hollow space where his certainty used to be. And his feet, almost of their own volition, felt a pull not toward the clamor of the practice yards, but back toward the silent, puzzling peace of the archives. Chapter 4. The Boredom Beautiful. Rumors at Ethelgard Academy were a form of alchemy, transforming mundane events into epic sagas. The tale of Leo Stormwrath, the undefeated champion, spending his afternoons in the library, was a particularly potent catalyst. At first, it was mere curiosity. Saw Stormwrath in the stacks yesterday. Looking for advanced battle manuals, probably. Then it grew stranger. He was just sitting there, near the history section, not reading, just sitting. Finally, it blossomed into full-blown myth. He's under a spell. That Finch boy, the one who vanished, he's a mind mage. He's ensorcelled the hero. He's stealing his destiny from the shadows of the archive. Alistair, cocooned in his routine, was largely oblivious. His world had settled into a deeply satisfying pattern. Dawn tea, morning conservation work, afternoon shelving or indexing, evening reading with a fresh pot. The ebb and flow of the library's quiet business was his new liturgy. The distant, occasional roar from the arena was just weather. He became aware of the change in his status not through gossip, but through the behavior of others. Fellow students from the history track, who had previously ignored the washed-out combatant in their midst, now nodded to him with a wary respect. A few brave souls even asked him for help finding obscure texts, which he provided with efficient, silent courtesy. He was no longer Finch the failure, but Finch from the archives, an enigmatic figure with the champion's inexplicable attention. The attention itself was a constant, quiet presence. Leo didn't confront him again. He just appeared. He would take up residence in a corral a few aisles over, or pretend to peruse shelves nearby. He never asked for anything. He just watched, with an intensity that was both flattering and unnerving. One afternoon, Alistair was repairing the broken clasp on a portfolio of star charts. He could feel Leo's gaze from across the aisle, a physical weight on the back of his neck. With a soft sigh, Alistair set down his pliers, picked up his teapot and an extra cup from his nook, and walked over. Leo started, hastily grabbing a random book from the shelf, a treatise on the mineralogy of the Eastern Fells, and pretending to read. Alistair placed the spare cup on the desk and poured. The fragrant steam of jasmine silver needle tea uncurled between them. "You seem to have a recurring interest in geological surveys, Stormwrath," Alistair said mildly, nodding at the book. "Page 87 has a particularly illuminating passage on quartzite mana permeability. Leo flushed, dropping the book as if it were hot. It's not. The tea helps with concentration, Alistair continued, as if discussing the weather, and with the patience required for observational tasks. He met Leo's eyes briefly. You're not very good at observation. You broadcast your presence like a beacon. In here, you learn to be a ghost. He turned and went back to his work. Leo stared at the full cup of tea, its heat seeping into the polished wood. He took a sip. It was delicate, complex, utterly unlike the hearty, bitter brew served in the halls. It tasted the way Alistair's silence felt. He didn't touch the geology text again. He just sat, sipped the tea, and tried for the first time to actually see the library. He noticed the way dust motes danced in the slants of light from high windows. He heard the subtle, rhythmic scratch of Alistair's pliers on metal, the soft rustle of a page turning somewhere in the depths. He saw the profound order of the endless shelves, a universe categorized and understood. It was a different kind of power, a quiet power. He began to skip more training sessions, not out of laziness, but out of a growing addiction to this quiet. The arena's chaos started to feel crude, its victories cheap compared to the profound satisfaction of watching Alistair complete a perfect line of archival script, or successfully separate two pages that had been fused for a century. His absence did not go unnoticed. Where were you? Evangeline's voice was a blade of ice in the corridor outside the Celestial Stream practice hall. She stood, hands on her hips, her practice robes immaculate. We had a duel scheduled, a serious one. I waited for 20 minutes. Leo, his mind still half in the cool twilight of the archives, blinked. I lost track of time. Lost track of time? She echoed, incredulous. Doing what? Let me guess. The library. She said the word like it was a contagion. Finch was reading a history of inter-realm trade routes during the Third Elven Diaspora, Leo said, the words tumbling out. It was fascinating, the way he traced the flow of spell components and how it influenced political borders. It was like watching a battle strategy unfold on a map of economics. Evangeline stared at him as if he'd sprouted a second head. Her beautiful face paled with a fury far colder than any battlefield heat. Trade routes, she repeated flatly. You stood me up for trade routes. The betrayal in her eyes was sharp and personal. She wasn't just a spurned duelist. She was a rival for narrative space, and he was ceding it to a librarian. What is wrong with you, Leo? He's gotten into your head. He's a nobody, a deserter. He's not a nobody, Leo heard himself say, the conviction in his own voice surprising him. He's just not playing our game. It's the only game that matters. Evangeline shot back, her composure cracking. You're the chosen one. You're supposed to be focusing on your ascendance, on the great threats, on me, not on some bored bookworm with pretty hands. She stormed away, leaving Leo alone in the corridor. Her words echoed. Pretty hands. He hadn't consciously registered it, but she was right. Alistair's hands were elegant, long-fingered, moving with a precise grace whether they were wielding a restoration brush or turning a page. They were the hands of scholar, not a brawler. They were beautiful. He looked down at his own hands, scarred from mana burns and weapon grips, strong, capable of unleashing devastation. They felt crude suddenly, unsubtle. He didn't go to the practice hall. He didn't go to the archives either. He went to the highest battlement of the academy and looked out over the spires and arenas, the places designed for people like him. The script of his life lay before him, written in fire and glory. But for the first time, he could see the margins of the page. And in those margins, in the quiet, dust-filled spaces between the epic lines, was Alistair Finch. Not playing the game, not even acknowledging it. And Leo, the hero, the center of the story, found himself hopelessly, dangerously curious about the margins. Back in the archives, Alistair finished the star chart clasp. He poured the last of the tea from his pot, now cold. He could feel the unusual absence of Leo's gaze today. It was noticeable. The library felt emptier, as if a noisy, colorful bird that had taken to nesting in the rafters had flown away. He told himself the quiet was a relief. But as he cleaned his tools with methodical care, A single, unbidden thought surfaced. I hope he liked the tea. He dismissed it immediately as professional courtesy. Nothing more. The sanctuary was intact. His peace was secure. Yet, the air in the archives seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next disruption, aware now that the story outside its walls was changing, and it had unwittingly become a setting for a new, uncharted plot. Chapter 5. The Archives Fight Back. Professor Brandt's war on Alistair's peace was fought with legalistic poison. The morning after Leo's first missed training session, Brandt arrived at the archives with two gray-robed inquisitors. Apprentice Finch, Brandt's voice shattered the quiet. You are harboring prescribed knowledge. Alistair looked up from his desk. This is a secured area. You require a requisition form. We require you to stand aside, said Inquisitor Hale, a grim man with eyes like stone. They pushed past him to his conservation alcove. Within moments, one held up a crimson leather tome. The Crimson Verses of Forlag, a blood magic grimoire banned for centuries. Brandt's triumph was a cold smile. Your archive sanctuary ends now, boy. Suspension and trial await. Head Archivist Morn materialized from the shadows. Have you verified the chain of custody, Inquisitor? He stole it. Brandt snapped. In the archives, Morn said, her voice a paper cut, nothing is stolen, only misplaced. She nodded to Alistair. Calmly, he walked to a section of wall, pressed hidden indentations, and slid open a concealed drawer. He withdrew 3 ledgers. The Master Record, Alistair began, his voice steady, shows Verses of Forlag, Catalog R 779, was last accessed under sanctioned Order 4472 in 331A, signature here. He pointed to spidery script. He opened the daily log. I verify the seals of all restricted texts each morning. My initials are here for R 779 at 6:45 today. Countersigned by the head archivist. Finally, his assignment docket. My tasks today, water-damaged folio conservation, reshelving astrology returns, updating the herbology index. No assignment pertains to R 779. He looked at Hale. For this book to be in my alcove, it would have to bypass an intact seal, be removed without logging, and appear without assignment. The paperwork does not support that. The silence was profound. Brandt sputtered. He's hiding behind bureaucracy. We are in a library, Morn said. Bureaucracy is the foundation. The evidence suggests a security breach and a possible frame. Leo arrived then, drawn by the commotion. He took in the scene. The furious professor, the damning book, Alistair standing behind his wall of ledgers. Professor, Leo asked. Stormwrath. Tell them, Brandt implored. You've seen his erratic behavior, his obsession with dark corners. All eyes turned to the hero. Leo looked at Alistair, who met his gaze with exhausted resignation, as if he'd expected this all along. That look decided it. Sir, Leo said to Hale, his voice firm. I've been here often. Apprentice Finch's conduct is exemplary. He cares more about saving books than using them. I vouch for his character. The words from the Chosen One were a weight that tipped the scales. Hale looked from the impeccable paperwork to the livid professor. The records are compelling, Hale said, closing the master log. We will investigate the security breach. Professor, you will accompany us. Apprentice, remain available. The book returns to the head archivist. The Inquisitors led a spluttering Brandt away. The charged silence they left behind trembled. Morn placed a hand on Alistair's shoulder. Well defended. She looked at Leo. Your testimony was apartment. Thank you. She glided off. Alone in the ransacked alcove, Leo let out a breath. He really tried to destroy you. He tried to restore the narrative. Alistair corrected, straightening a spilled pot of gel. I was a missing piece. Why is your piece so threatening? Alistair stopped, looking at him with profound weariness. Because it suggests the story they've written is optional. That's a dangerous idea. He began cleaning up the mess. You should go. Your part is done. A noble subplot. It was a dismissal, but a weary one. Leo didn't move. He watched Alistair's stained, elegant hands work. He hadn't vouched for him out of nobility. He'd done it because the thought of this quiet corner being destroyed filled him with a panic deeper than any battle fear. It wasn't a subplot, Leo said quietly, and you're not helpless. Alistair didn't answer, but the sanctuary had been breached. Its peace was now a fortress under siege. And as Leo stood there, he realized the battle lines had shifted. He was no longer just obsessed with the puzzle. He was, for reasons he couldn't name, on his side. Chapter 6, Script Rewritten. The Grand Gauntlet was Ethelgard's epic trial. Alistair, as Vale record keeper, sat on an observation platform with his maps, ink, and a small pot of tea. He tracked the 40 participants with detached professionalism. Leo's gold token advanced with predictable, brilliant dominance. The climax was the Vale Guardian, a shale-screech golem, a hulking monster of animated rock. Leo coordinated the attack perfectly, drawing its aggression. Alistair noted, Stormwrath assumes command. Golem primary aggro sustained. Then the script broke. With a grinding roar, the golem shattered part of the cliff, then turned its faceless head, not toward its attackers, but toward the observation platforms. It lurched toward the non-combatants. Panic erupted. Leo shouted, redirecting his squad to intercept, but the golem was single-minded. A seismic stomp cracked the earth, forcing Leo back. It was going to crush the platforms. Alistair's mind, trained in calm cross-referencing, did not panic. It recalled Shale Screech, the name, a footnote from a travelogue he'd catalogued last week. Miners fear screech demons for the resonance of their forms, disrupted not by force, but by refined limestone powder, which clogs their magical matrix like grit in a gear. A fable, not combat theory. The golem was 20 yards away. Leo poured useless lightning into its back. Alistair stepped to the platform's edge and shouted, his voice clear as a lecturer's. Stormwrath. Its underbelly. Refined limestone dust. It reacts with the sintering mana. Leo heard. He didn't understand, but he heard the conviction. He abandoned his attack and cast a wide pulverized spell at the limestone scree beneath the golem. Another mage conjured a gust, throwing the white cloud into its joints. The golem seized. It emitted a high, grating screech, limbs locking. It swayed and collapsed inward into a heap of inert rock. The sudden silence was deafening. All eyes turned from a fallen monster to Leo, then up to the slender record keeper on the platform. Alistair lowered his hands, picked up his quill, and made a final notation with trembling script. 1437. Guardian neutralized via environmental interaction, limestone particulate. The victory celebration was muted, confused. Leo accepted the laurels, but his gaze kept drifting upward. The hero had struck the blow, but the key had been provided by the archivist in the margins. That evening, whispers swirled. Limestone dust? How did he know? Alistair did not attend the feast. He was in the archives, scrubbing ink from his tunic. The adrenaline faded, leaving a deep understanding. He had not wanted to be part of the story. But today, he hadn't fought. He'd provided a citation. He had proven the knowledge in these stacks was not dead history. It was a weapon, a shield, a key. The script now had a new footnote. Finch, see also, applied historical solutions. Chapter 7. The Sanctuary is breached. Peace, Alistair learned, was a fortress to maintain, and his was now marked on every map. After the gauntlet, he was no longer obscure. He was the limestone dust mage, Stormwrath strategist. The quiet carols held curious onlookers. Factions made offers. The Alchemical Guild wanted to weaponize historical trivia. Strategic Command wanted his lateral thinking. The final straw was a vellum-edged letter offering fast-track reinstatement to advanced combat magic, signed by the headmaster. Alistair's fury was cold and silent. He took it to the deepest sub-basement among obsolete tax records and began slamming ledgers on his shelves with dull, angry thuds. You'll damage the bindings. He froze. Leo stood at the aisle's end. What do you want? Alistair's voice was flat. Come to recruit me for your next spectacle? I saw the letter. Brant was crowing. Sense, Alistair echoed. What is sense? Being a target? Or a reference tool for people who only see conflict? He turned, raw frustration in his eyes. I am not part of your story, Leo. I am the reader in the corner. The footnote. The quiet. And I prefer it. Why is that impossible to understand? It was the first time he'd used Leo's name. It was exhausted, not friendly. Leo leaned against a shelf, looking young and unsure. I'm trying to understand. That's why I keep coming. I don't know how to be still. My life is so loud. In here, it's quiet. You're quiet. Even your anger is quiet. It's real. He met Alistair's gaze. You found a way out of the noise. Can you teach me how to do that? How to be bored? The absurd, honest question deflated Alistair's anger. He saw not the hero, but a boy drowning in a narrative. Boredom isn't something you do, Alistair said softly. It's what happens when you stop performing. He picked up a ledger. This is grain yields, 223 AA. It's dull, but within it is a drought, a tax policy, a preservation spell. It's about paying a different kind of attention. He held out the book. Leo stared at it. Before he could respond, a deep, unearthly chime resonated through the stone. The archival ward alarm, unheard for decades. They sprinted upstairs to chaos. The air was grayish, smelling of burnt sugar and forgotten memories. Apprentices ran in terror. Head archivist Morn stood grimly in the center. The Lethean echo, a contagion. It attacks recorded knowledge, turns text to gibberish, maps to blank parchment. It's spreading from the lower vaults. A junior sobbed. The first founding charters, they're just smudges. Alistair's blood ran cold. This was an attack on history itself. On memory. Professor Brant burst in with combat mages. We'll contain it with a purging firewall. No, Alistair and Morn shouted together. Fire will destroy what the echo hasn't. Morn snapped. Its antidote is a spell of recollection. We need the Sourcecaster's signature to create a counterlogic. Brant stared, uncomprehending. Alistair's mind raced. We need to stabilize the periphery, create a buffer of reinforced memory. We need runners to retrieve specific texts. And guards. The echo manifests as shades, aggressive memory ghosts. He looked at Leo. We need runners. And guards. Leo straightened. A fight, but not as kind. A defense of the archive. Tell me what to do. In that moment, the hierarchy inverted. The scholar took command. The hero became the soldier. The sanctuary was breached, but its keepers would not flee. They would fight with catalog numbers and provenance. The final battle had begun, and its battlefield was the only home Alistair had ever known. Chapter 8. The Managers of History. The archives were a war zone of silence and forgetting. A whispering gray tide leached color and meaning. Titles blurred into swirls. The air grew tasteless. Morn commanded from the main desk. Alistair marked the echo's advance on a map. It follows the mana conduits. An hour until the founding scrolls are lost. Brant and his mages stood by, impotent. Their fire would be a holocaust. Their shields couldn't stop an idea from being unmade. The counterlogic, Morn said to Alistair. Find a source signature. I'll craft the buffer here. She turned to a paralyzed junior. Fetch the lexicon of permanent inks, the treatise on mnemonic wards, the annals of the archival council. I'll get them, Leo said. He pointed to two friends. Davin with me. Kale, guard this desk. He looked at Alistair. Tell me where. Alistair, sending the chosen one on a fetch quest, gave swift, precise locations. Leo ran. The source, Alistair said, studying the map. A recent acquisition. The Cartwright collection, flagged for residual anomalous mana. It's in the processing bay, already behind the gray front. Then we go in, said Evangeline, stepping forward, her robes gleaming in the dimness. You to find the source. Us to keep the shades off you. Alistair looked at Morn, who nodded. Take Stormwrath as group. Go. When Leo returned, arms laden with tomes, his eyes were wide with awe. The upper gallery, the air is clear. You can think. Good, Alistair said. Now we go where you can't. The team, Alistair, Leo, Evangeline, Davin, entered the afflicted corridor. The world turned monochrome. Whispers plucked at their thoughts. What was I looking for? A shade coalesced, a blurry scholar form, dripping gray sludge. Evangeline's lightning died on her fingers. Leo stepped in, smashed it with a marble bookend. Old-fashioned works. They pressed on, Alistair navigating the gray soup. They reached the processing bay. An open iron chest pulsed with sickly violet-gray light, spilling corrupted scrolls. The chest is the vector, Alistair whispered. I need to touch it, feel the signature. As he stepped forward, a dozen shades erupted from the mist. Finch, do your job, Leo yelled. He, Evangeline, and Davin formed a triangle, brawling with bookends and chair legs against the memory ghosts. Alistair blocked it out. He placed his hands on the cold, hungry iron. He closed his eyes, visualizing the page from intake. The recursive symbology, its arrogant desire to be the only thought left. It's an argument for oblivion, he murmured. Its counter is a footnote of persistence. He grabbed a stylus and vellum. He didn't copy the sigil. He drew its reference. Catalog number, shelf location, cross-index terms. On the back, he wrote, I remember, so it exists. He slapped the vellum onto the chest. The violet light flared, recoiled, swirled onto the vellum, which turned to lead-gray dust. The contagion's advance stopped. The whispers ceased. The shades dissolved. In the sudden, clean silence, the gray mist receded, leaving restored, vibrant color. Titles sharpened into clarity. Panting, bruised, Leo caught Alistair as his legs gave way. You cited it to death. I managed it, Alistair breathed. It's what we do. The recovery took a week. Morn's buffer held. Alistair's counter-logic healed text page by page. The combat mages secured the perimeter. At a convocation, the Academy hailed the library corps. Brant Forrest offered Alistair a professorship in applied historical combat theory. Alistair stood before them all. Thank you, but I decline. My place is ensuring the knowledge we have is not lost. I accept the permanent position of sub-archivist. He saw Brant's jaw tighten, Leo's genuine smile. Days later, in the restored quiet, Leo sat in a corral, frowning fiercely at a tome. He fidgeted. He sighed, but he was trying. A cup of jasmine silver needle tea appeared beside him. A green leather bookmark, tooled with a clarity rune, lay next to it. Page 45, Alistair said softly, has a relevant passage on elemental fire and focused will. It might reframe your channeling. Leo looked up, frustration melting into warmth. He picked up the bookmark. It's not boring. It's just quiet. It gets quieter, Alistair said, a serene smile returning. The good parts are always in the quiet. He moved away to reshelve books, the soft shush the only sound. Leo watched him go, the elegant line of his back, the calm purpose, then looked at the book, the tea, the beautiful, perfect bookmark. He took a sip, turned to page 45, and began to read. Outside, duels and laughter echoed. But in the heart of the archives, a new story was being written in the quiet, steady turning of pages, shared between a keeper of silence and a hero learning how to listen.